What is up, duelists? Welcome back to another off-stream reaction. Not something we do very often, but we have an OCG ban list, and I'm not live today because I'm still recovering from my Duelist Cup journey over the course of the weekend. But I still wanted to react to this new OCG ban list. I figured some of you have probably already seen it, but I think it's still worth talking about because there is some massive changes on here. Even though I will say it feels like a very OCG typical ban list in some ways and not in others. So I think it's interesting. Either way, the reason why I always like looking at OCG ban lists is of course because the Master Duel in particular tends to follow these with a little bit of delay sometimes. But yeah, the philosophy behind Master Duel and OCG seems to be very similar. And that's why I think this is potentially very interesting. Also, just in general, I just really like looking at what's going on in the OCG as well, because they are at the end also playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Either way, we have two banned cards that I'm not going to spend too much time talking about because it's basically two cards that have been banned in the TCG for a long time, with Artifact, Scythe, and Summon Limit. Well, I think Summon Limit actually went somewhat recently in the TCG, like a year ago maybe, if I had to guess. But of course, you guys know my opinion on this. Both of these cards rightfully banned, deserve to be banned, and specifically Artifact Scythe was a card that I sometimes made fun of the OCG for still having to play with, because it was kind of like pretty dominant in recent formats for them, and I just couldn't fathom why they still had it. But they finally banned both of these, so that is good news for most of the OCG player base, I would assume. So yeah, but not much here to talk about other than, yeah, coldest take ever, these two should be banned. Yeah. Limited section is where it gets a little bit more interesting. So here is where obviously we start talking about the more significant hits towards the current meta decks. Like Scythe and Summon Limit are more like generic cards, but here is where like the bread and butter of this ban list is, because it is the stuff that they hit from the meta decks, which is obviously OCG currently mostly dominated by Ryzeal and Malice, just like the TCG. It's just that in their own right, their decks are even a little bit more powerful because they've already received more waves of support. For example, Malice has the new main deck monster and the new spell already, as well as the new like AI support or whatever it's called. There's new cyber support that they're playing in Malice. And Ryzeal obviously has the new main deck monster as well that sets a Ryzeal spell trap on summon. So like both of these decks are incredibly powerful. Specifically Ryzeal, it seems like their approach to hitting the deck is they're just going down a very slippery slope of consistency hits recently with the OCG, and this is why I particularly said this feels like a very OCG ban list in some ways, because they've done the same thing to Snake Eyes. They've basically just done consistency hits, like consistency hit after consistency hit, until the deck was just not playable enough anymore, until it wasn't meta relevant anymore, because technically Snake Eye is still basically at full power in the OCG. They still have all the things, right? All the broken stuff that Snake Eyes was doing, they can technically still do. It's just that they have like, I don't know by heart, but they have like one Bonfire, one Snake Eye Ash, one Poplar, one Wanted, one Diabell Star, all that stuff, while stuff like Appaloosa is still completely untouched, you know? So I do plan on making a discussion on, like, in general, consistency hits and why I'm usually not a fan of them, because I feel like it's something that comes up every time I talk about a ban list or every time, whatever. It's just like, we talk about consistency hits, but I don't think I've ever uploaded a discussion where I actually talk about what the pros and cons of these sort of things are. So look out for that in the next couple of days. It's probably going to be a discussion that we're going to have live on stream, and then I'm hoping it makes its way onto the main channel. But in the sense of Ryzeal, in Ryzeal's case, I actually don't mind it that much, because I feel like Ryzeal is a deck that, despite having those consistency hits, like, doesn't really mind it that much. I feel like 1/7 Tachyon, 1 Sword Ryzeal does not render Ryzeal unplayable. However, it will mean that some hands just play through less disruption, you know, because I think with 1/7 Tachyon and 1 Sword Ryzeal, I feel like Ryzeal still opens a play consistently. The question is, does it open an extender plus a play consistently? To which the answer might be no, because now you can still play 4 copies of 7th Tachyon if you're desperate for consistency, because 7th Ascension also exists. You got 1 Sword Ryzeal, you got 1 X Ryzeal, you got 3 Ice Ryzeal, you still have the 1 Bonfire, so it's still like, a decent amount of starters, I would say, but not great. I don't think it's going to kill Ryzeal for now, though. The deck that I find more interesting here is Malice, and I've talked about this in my TCG ban list discussion, and I feel like Malice is just incredibly hard to hit. From a game design perspective, it's like Malice is a deck that has essentially no real issues other than consistency. And most of its cards are either one of like extra deck cards, like all the Link monsters you only play one copy of. So if you wanted to impact those, you'd have to ban them, which is it feels a little bit too much. You know, I get that. Like talking about banning Whitebinder already, I think is like, even as someone who doesn't particularly like Malice, it feels over the top. So I haven't been suggesting that myself. But then again, limiting something like Dormouse ultimately just forces Malice to play like Signet mining instead, maybe, or just hope that one Dormouse is good enough and you don't break, and then you can still basically perform the same combos as before. So that's why consistency hits can sometimes feel a little bit weird. But in Malice's case, I feel like they don't have that many options. You either have to ban some of their Link monsters, or you have to limit some of their starters. And they went with the latter, which is a very OCG kind of approach. I will say this, from a TCG perspective, this seems like a fair hit. I have seen some OCG players talk about this online and say they don't feel like this is sufficient for Malice, because Malice, with the new Adignister support, actually has a lot of other routes it can go down. Like, it's basically a much more Cyberse combo heavy deck in the OCG than it is for us in the TCG at the moment. So while this, from a TCG player's current format perspective, I think Limit Dormouse seems fine, I don't know if that's going to be the exact route that was optimal for actually impacting Malice in the OCG, because it just feels like they might replace it with Signet mining if they really want to, but they can also just lean in more on like other Cyberse combos to just replace it or not feel that impacted by it. Like the OCG version of Malice does not feel like it has those consistency issues that much as it does in the TCG sometimes, you know, because in the TCG it's basically, if you don't open Dormouse, White Rabbit, or any way to them, then you're fine against Malice. Like they won't really do anything crazy. I don't know if that's true in the OCG, but yeah. Consistency hits to the top two decks. Not my favorite way of approaching it, but definitely a certified OCG classic. Dimension Shifter, on the other hand, is something that the OCG and Master Duel now have in... that is something they have over the TCG. Somehow, the OCG, which is leaving all kinds of crazy cards legal, like Appaloosa and Max C and whatnot, even they realize that Dimension Shifter is a freaking problem, you know, and Abyss Dweller as well is gone in the OCG. So that has me a little jealous, you know. Like I really want those cards to be hit in the TCG as well, and it's all fine and cool as long as the OCG has the weird decisions, you know. But the TCG leaving this legal at 3 alongside, like there's a few cards that the OCG has hit on their ban list that I'm jealous of, and Dimension Shifter is one of them. Abyss Dweller, Crossout Designator being at 1 is something that I'm jealous of. I want that too. And now, obviously, Dimension Shifter joins the ranks of Master Duel, where it's already limited. Yeah, can't stress enough how much I like this. This card, I mean, 1 is not where I want it to be, but I'll take it at this point. Like, I 1 is better than 3, basically. Even 2 is better than 3, but something needs to happen about this card, right? So, yeah. That grass looks greener is going from, I think, what was that? Was it banned in the OCG? They're bringing it back? I think so. So, grass looks greener to 1. Can't really argue with it. From Master Duel and TCG perspective, card is legal in both formats and is doing a fair amount of things without feeling too powerful. You know, 60 card decks are a thing in Master Duel, especially. I haven't run into one in the TCG in a long time, but in Master Duel, you'll see people turn up with them and do okay, but like, it's nothing too powerful. It's not something where you can say like, oh, it shouldn't exist because it's too oppressive or whatever. I think grass at this point in time, as a one-off, I'm fine with it. You know, I think it's okay. Then we have semi-limited cards, which are 2 cards moving up from limited to 2, which are Cyberjar and Purely Sleepy Memory, which I'm not gonna lie, that just caught me a little bit off guard. I looked at mainly the banned section and the limited section before starting this recording, but I didn't even know Purely Sleepy Memory was limited. That's crazy. And the fact that they only put it to 2 is also crazy. With where Purely is in terms of power level, that card should be at 3. It's crazy, but that is just another trend in Yu-Gi-Oh recently, that cards just become unlimited or unhit a little bit too late, or they're a little bit too cautious about it, which I can understand. Of course, they do want those decks to come back eventually, but they also kind of want people to play with their new stuff. And of course, if they make decks relevant too soon, then it might like limit the amount of players that pick up the new decks. Whatever. Both of these cards are absolutely fine. Haven't really done anything. I find it very funny that we live in a time where cards like Cyberjar and the other jars just are coming off of the list to like 2 and 3, which I find it hilarious. And I honestly, these effects are still very powerful. So I'm actually kind of hyped to see if there's ever like a use case for these cards. I would love to see someone cook something with Cyberjar. I got cooked by Morphing Jar in a stun deck recently in Master Duel, which obviously the stun part wasn't fun, but the fact that they did like they wouldn't like set 4 and then set a Morphing Jar and then flipped some floodgates, and then Morphing Jar flipped and drew them 5 new cards, which drew them all the counter traps. It was kind of toxic, but the use of Morphing Jar was at least creative. And then cards that are completely unlimited now. Kirin, finally, never the correct hit for Fire King, by the way. They should have always just hit the Snake Eye part. If putting Kirin to 2 was criminal, and this should be at 3. Monkey Board, not a huge fan of Pendulum Slob at the moment, especially in formats where Electromite is legal. However, it turns out the Performapal stuff is just not the thing that they even go for. It turns out there's just better Pendulum engines now. So both Chronograph and Monkey Board are absolutely fine from my perspective. Masterpiece is also completely fine. Does nothing in Master Duel, and rightfully so. Unlimited. Speaking of Morphing Jar, there's now 3 copies. Yeah, despite it cooked me in a stun deck, but if anything, the stun was the problem. It was not this little guy. This little guy is fine. Snatch Steal at 3, absolutely fine. Big fan of this one because I think this is like one of the few cards here that actually has a chance of seeing like generic, mainly sideboard play for going second. If there's ever a deck that is weak to those kind of like take control cards, then, you know, a card like Change of Heart, Snatch Steal coming off of the list, I think is cool because it has an actual chance of impacting the game, especially if they have a best of 3, right? And then we got Zodiac Barrage, which is also completely fine from the perspective of someone who's... I've messed around with Zodiac in Master Duel with 3 Dryden and 3 Barrages, and it just does not feel problematic whatsoever. But yeah, that is usually the case with Unlimits in Yu-Gi-Oh! At the moment, is that the power level of Yu-Gi-Oh! During 2024 with Snake Eye and whatever has increased by such a... Like, it was a pretty strong year in terms of card releases, that most of the Unlimits and stuff that's coming off the ban list just feels like it pays a little bit in comparison of what some of the more modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Decks do. So yeah, that's the OCG ban list. Overall, I would be very interested in whether you think this does actually shake up the Ryziel Malice format for them. Particularly Malice, I think, is very light on the hits here. I mean, you compare Malice to Ryziel, you see like, okay, 1 X, 1 Sword, 1 Bonfire, 1 7 Tachyon. It feels like no Abyss Dweller feels like a very significant amount of hits to Ryziel, whereas Malice is just like 1 Dormouse. Plus you get Adignister support. I guess Shifter counts a little bit as a Malice hit, but not really, let's be honest. The deck is being played just fine without Shifter in the TCG a lot as well. So I don't know, I feel like it's very light on the Malice hits, which has been a deck like, from current TCG perspective, that might seem reasonable because Ryziel is way more dominant in the TCG than Malice. But from recent OCG metagame reports, I feel like they were actually on par in the OCG right now. So it feels like they're being a little bit they're being a little light on Malice. But that is just that. Other than that, I think most of these cards are cards that are moving in the right direction. You know, there's no card here that I feel like, oh, I don't know why this card is moving up or down the ban list in this way. Like, I understand all of these decisions. I think they're all fine. But yeah, that's why I feel like this is a very OCG ban list in some ways, because it's just full of understandable consistency hits, which you may or may not agree with making consistency hits in general, but you can't really argue that Malice and Ryzeal are the decks that deserve hits. And I also don't think you can really argue that cards like Scythe, Summon Limit, and Shifter deserve to be hit in some way, shape, or form, or that any of the stuff that's coming back is coming back, right? So yeah, let me know what you think in the comments down below. Hope you enjoy this little bit of an extra reaction off stream. And yeah,